in a hard place.
April 3rd, 2025. Without warning, President Donald Trump hits Beijing with the most aggressive tariff strike in modern US history. 145% on all Chinese imports. 2 days later, China fires back. 125% tariffs on US goods. No talks, no signals, just escalation. Markets tremble. But on April 14th, a quiet but deliberate move breaks through the noise. Xi Jinping's visit. Destination? Not Moscow, not Brussels, not Geneva, but Hanoi, Vietnam. So what happened now? The real question is why Vietnam? Actually, Xi Jinping's international visits are carefully calculated. Vietnam has received particular attention in his regional outreach. Since 2011, Xi has visited Vietnam 5 times in various roles, more than any other ASEAN country. These visits reflect both the geographic proximity and the strategic complexity of the bilateral relationship. China and Vietnam are 2 of the few remaining socialist one-party states. They share a long border and deep historical ties. Officially, the relationship is described as comrades and brothers. However, it also includes periods of tension, particularly related to maritime disputes and overlapping interests. Despite differences, both countries have maintained regular high-level exchanges. Economic cooperation has expanded significantly in recent decades. China remains a major source of raw materials for Vietnam's manufacturing sector. At the same time, Vietnam plays an increasingly important role in regional supply chains. From Beijing's perspective, Vietnam is an essential partner in maintaining regional stability. China's neighborhood diplomacy emphasizes peaceful development, economic integration, and dialogue with neighboring countries. Within this framework, Vietnam's role is significant due to its political system, economic growth, and regional position. Xi's recent visit to Hanoi came at a sensitive moment, following major changes in global trade dynamics. Observers noted that his visit carried symbolic weight in the context of recent tariff developments. The visit highlighted a shared interest in dialogue, economic cooperation, and regional connectivity. While both countries continue to manage their differences, their leaders have expressed a consistent commitment to practical cooperation. Xi's visit reaffirmed a long-standing diplomatic relationship, emphasizing mutual respect and a shared regional vision. On April 3, 2025, the United States announced a sweeping 145% tariff on all imports from China. The decision marked one of the most dramatic shifts in U.S. trade policy in recent years. It signaled the beginning of a new phase in the U.S.-China economic relationship, characterized by confrontation rather than cooperation. From Washington's perspective, these tariffs weren't only economic measures. They were part of a larger Indo-Pacific recalibration, meant to punish unfair trade practices, but also to test the limits of Chinese resilience. China responded 2 days later with a 125% tariff on selected American goods. The move was widely viewed as a direct and proportional countermeasure. Both sides halted ongoing trade talks, and official communication channels were suspended. The shock was not limited to China and the United States. Vietnam, Cambodia, and Malaysia were also affected by new U.S. tariffs. Vietnam faced a 46% tariff on selected exports to the U.S., while Cambodia and Malaysia were subject to 49% and 24%, respectively. The announcement caused turbulence in global markets. Manufacturers, investors, and governments across Asia began reassessing their supply chain strategies. Southeast Asia, once seen as a safe alternative to China, suddenly found itself caught in the middle. Vietnam in particular faced a dual challenge. It had become a key beneficiary of supply chain diversification away from China, but the sudden imposition of US tariffs placed new pressure on its export-led economy. In response, the Vietnamese government opened discussions with Washington to clarify trade terms. It also introduced new measures to tighten control over rules of origin compliance, especially on Chinese goods re-exported via Vietnam. The tariff shock highlighted how deeply interconnected the global economy had become. It also revealed the growing complexity of strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific region. In this environment, diplomatic gestures, including high-profile state visits, began to carry new geopolitical weight. Xi Jinping's visit to Vietnam in April 2025 was not merely a routine diplomatic event. It was a carefully timed response to a rapidly shifting global landscape. Coming just 11 days after the United States imposed sweeping 145% tariffs on Chinese goods, the visit carried clear strategic undertones. Vietnam was the first stop in Xi's Southeast Asia tour, ahead of Malaysia and Cambodia. Observers noted the sequencing was intentional and reflected Vietnam's growing importance in the region. Among ASEAN countries, Vietnam has become a key node in global supply chains and a prominent player in regional diplomacy. Over the past decade, Vietnam has attracted significant foreign direct investment, especially from firms seeking to diversify production away from China. This trend accelerated during the US-China trade war beginning in 2018, and again after global disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Vietnam's export-oriented economy, political stability, and integration into major trade agreements like the CPTPP and RCEP have made it a preferred alternative for global manufacturers. For China, this shift poses both opportunities and risks. On the one hand, Vietnam's growth benefits regional development and maintains economic interdependence with China. On the other, the rapid rise of Vietnam as a substitute for Chinese manufacturing raises concerns about long-term strategic displacement. In addition, Vietnam's deepening ties with the United States have drawn Beijing's attention. The two countries have expanded cooperation in areas such as technology, defense, and supply chain resilience. Vietnam's recent decision to work with US companies on satellite connectivity and advanced manufacturing was interpreted by some analysts as a sign of cautious alignment with Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy. Beijing's foreign policy under Xi Jinping emphasizes the principle of neighborhood diplomacy. This includes maintaining stability on China's periphery, building long-term economic linkages, and preventing encirclement by rival powers. Vietnam fits squarely into this framework as both a crucial neighbor and a potential swing state in the region's geopolitical balance. By visiting Hanoi first, Xi aimed to reinforce bilateral ties at a moment of heightened global uncertainty. The move was also designed to prevent misalignment, not through pressure, but through engagement. It sent a clear message that China remains committed to peaceful coexistence, mutual development, and regional stability. Importantly, the visit also acknowledged the strategic autonomy of Vietnam's foreign policy. Unlike treaty allies or formal blocs, Vietnam has pursued a principle of independence, self-reliance, and multilateralism. This makes it both a valuable and complex partner for major powers, including China. Xi's visit reflected an understanding of that nuance. Rather than attempting to pull Vietnam into a rigid alignment, the trip focused on soft mechanisms. Economic cooperation, cultural exchanges, and shared infrastructure goals. In short, Vietnam was chosen first not because it is the most compliant partner, but because it is the most consequential. Its decisions carry weight across ASEAN, influence regional trade dynamics, and reflect the broader competition for influence in the Indo-Pacific. In that sense, Xi's landing in Hanoi was not just diplomatic protocol, it was strategic positioning, executed with timing, tact, and regional awareness. In the aftermath of heightened trade tensions, China's response was not only defensive, it was proactive. Rather than escalating rhetorically or militarily, Beijing leaned into soft power diplomacy. Xi Jinping's visit to Hanoi embodied a broader strategy to anchor relationships through long-term economic and cultural ties. At the core of this approach is China's belief in economic interdependence as a stabilizing force. For more than 2 decades, China has positioned itself as a central hub in regional value chains. But recent trade tensions and global supply chain realignments have introduced new volatility into that system. To counteract this, China is reinforcing bilateral relationships through infrastructure, trade incentives, and institutional engagement. In Vietnam, this meant reviving and expanding cross-border projects, including railway cooperation and digital connectivity initiatives. Proposals discussed during the visit included the use of Chinese concessional loans for railways linking China's Yunnan province with northern Vietnam, a long-considered project now elevated in priority. Beyond infrastructure, the visit also focused on facilitating high-value agricultural exports from Vietnam to China, responding to Vietnamese concerns over trade imbalances. This marked a shift from China's traditional export-dominant trade model toward more reciprocal trade flows. In addition, China proposed expanding cooperation in 5G technology, artificial intelligence, and green development, areas of shared interest with global economic relevance. These offers align with China's Belt and Road 2.0 agenda, which now prioritizes digital infrastructure and climate cooperation alongside physical transport links. At the cultural level, Beijing continues to invest in what scholars call people-to-people diplomacy. This includes expanding Mandarin language education in Vietnam, supporting Confucius institutes and cultural centers, and promoting academic exchange programs for Vietnamese students. While not new, these efforts are part of a coordinated campaign to build mutual familiarity and soft influence, especially among younger generations. According to Chinese officials, over 80% of Vietnamese students who study in China report a more favorable perception of the country afterward. Such statistics, while not universally accepted, underscore Beijing's long-term goal to normalize trust through consistent engagement, not just with governments, but with people. However, this strategy is not without its challenges. Vietnamese public opinion remains cautious about China, shaped by historical memory, sovereignty disputes, and asymmetry in power. Chinese investments are sometimes met with skepticism, especially in sectors viewed as strategic or sensitive. Still, the broader strategy remains clear. By embedding itself in the economic fabric of Southeast Asia, China reduces the space for abrupt shifts in alignment. Partnerships grounded in shared infrastructure, trade logistics, and education are harder to reverse than treaties alone. In this framework, Xi's visit to Vietnam was less about resolving a specific dispute and more about reinforcing long-term alignment. A reminder that while tensions rise globally, China's approach in the region remains grounded in gradual, layered engagement. From Hanoi's perspective, Xi Jinping's visit arrived at a delicate moment. The global environment was shifting rapidly, and Vietnam stood at the crossroads of escalating competition between the world's two largest economies. Vietnam's relationship with China is defined by geographic proximity, economic necessity, and historical complexity. The two countries share a 1,300-kilometer land border and strong trade links, but also deep-rooted tensions over sovereignty and maritime security. In recent years, Vietnam has taken a pragmatic approach to diplomacy, engaging both Beijing and Washington, while aligning fully with neither. This policy of strategic autonomy has allowed Vietnam to benefit from international trade and investment while maintaining independence in foreign policy decisions. As US-China tensions intensified, Vietnam became a focal point of attention. American companies increasingly shifted production from China to Vietnam, seeking to diversify supply chains and avoid tariffs. In parallel, US officials expanded engagement with Hanoi on issues ranging from digital infrastructure to defense cooperation. In 2023, the United States and Vietnam upgraded their relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership, the highest diplomatic level in Vietnam's foreign relations framework. This move placed the US on equal diplomatic footing with China, India, and Russia, signaling Hanoi's intention to maintain balanced ties among major powers. However, this balancing act is not without strain. Vietnam's economy is heavily export-dependent, with the United States accounting for over 30% of its total exports. At the same time, Vietnam imports more goods from China than from any other country, especially raw materials essential to its manufacturing sector. This dual dependency makes Vietnam uniquely exposed to disruptions on either side. When the United States imposed its new tariff package in April 2025, Vietnam was directly affected, facing a 46% tariff on selected exports. Hanoi responded by seeking clarification from Washington, strengthening origin controls on re-exported Chinese goods, and reaffirming its commitment to transparent trade practices. Meanwhile, the Vietnamese government also moved to preserve stability with China. Hosting Xi Jinping was a way to ensure continued dialogue and demonstrate goodwill without signaling alignment. In official statements, Vietnam emphasized mutual respect, non-interference, and practical cooperation. Hanoi's approach reflects a broader strategy known locally as Joing Goai Japhuong, Jok Lap, Tu Chu, multilateral, independent, and self-reliant diplomacy. This philosophy guides Vietnam's engagement with major powers, regional institutions, and global partners. By deepening ties with both China and the United States, while remaining cautious of overdependence on either, Vietnam hopes to preserve policy space in an increasingly polarized world. It's a difficult path to walk, but one that reflects the country's complex history and adaptive statecraft. Xi's visit, therefore, was not simply a diplomatic gesture. It was a reminder that Vietnam's position in regional geopolitics is pivotal, and that its choices matter not only to itself, but to the balance of power across all of Asia. It was a calculated move, one that revealed how geopolitical influence is increasingly exercised through connection, not confrontation. Rather than responding to rising US tariffs with hardline rhetoric or military gestures, China chose to engage through diplomacy. In doing so, Beijing signaled that it seeks to shape the Indo-Pacific's future, not only by projecting power, but by reinforcing partnerships. Vietnam, as a rapidly developing economy and an independent regional actor, plays a unique role in this unfolding story. It is simultaneously a manufacturing hub, a maritime stakeholder, and a strategic neighbor to both China and the United States. For China, maintaining close ties with Vietnam serves multiple objectives. It helps secure economic interdependence, prevents strategic encirclement, and reinforces China's broader neighborhood diplomacy strategy. For Vietnam, the challenge is more complex. Hanoi must manage deep trade relationships with China, preserve growing ties with the United States, and defend its sovereignty, all while maintaining an independent foreign policy. This balancing act reflects the broader reality of the 21st century that middle powers are no longer passive players. They are key architects of regional stability. Xi Jinping's visit to Hanoi was not simply about bilateral ties. It was about setting the tone for a new phase of great power competition. One that unfolds not just in capitals or conference rooms, but along trade corridors, infrastructure projects, and diplomatic engagements. As the Indo-Pacific becomes more contested, countries like Vietnam will continue to face difficult choices. But as this visit demonstrated, they also have agency and the ability to shape outcomes through diplomacy, pragmatism, and strategic clarity. In a world where pressure is rising and alliances are shifting, Xi's quiet stop in Hanoi reminded us that influence isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives without warning, on a single plane, to a single neighbor, but with global implications. Drop a comment for breaking news.